Welcome back to this latest lesson in our web interaction series, and today we're going to be starting fresh yet again with a new starter solution. And in this solution we have some HTML and some stuff set up that's going to allow us to create and apply some new web interaction components. So we're going to move on from the very simple switches and toggles that we built in previous lessons, and we're going to start to add some really cool stuff. And in this first lesson with this starter solution that we are creating, we're going to be creating a tabs component that's going to allow us to very easily add tabs anywhere we would like to our application. So that's going to be fun. We're going to start here in the Hyper application inside of the terminal, and in the video description down below, as always, you're going to find a link to download the starter solution, which is, of course, about food, as it always is with me anyway. And this one in particular is called Hangry Prints. So we're going to see all about what exactly that is in just a moment. But for now, the first thing you're going to do after you unzip this and change into that directory that you unzipped inside of your terminal, is going to run an npm install to go ahead and install the npm dependencies that you need to run a local dev server and build your solution. As soon as that's done, we can go ahead and run the code space dot command to open this up in Visual Studio Code, where we can take a look at the solution itself. And while this is open, we'll go ahead and switch back here and run npm run start to boot up our local dev server. Okay, so we have our local dev server up and running. I'm going to open up our Chrome Developer Tools, and you can sort of see what this application is about. We have some tabs, so we have some initial styles in HTML that's set up. Basically, the idea is this website or this app called Hangry Prints is for when you're feeling hungry and angry, for those of you that don't use that term. And when you're feeling hangry and you want some food really, really quickly, you're going to go onto the app, you're going to hit print, it charges you, and then it uses a 3D printer to actually print out the food. Pretty cool idea. Certainly in my opinion. But you can see we have some different categories of food. We have hot dogs, hamburgers, and of course vegetarian options for the health conscious out there. Within this app, we also have a menu that it has a working toggle on it to begin with that contains sort of the main menu for the application. We're going to be doing a lot with this in the next few lessons in the series, and we're going to start by wiring up this tabs functionality, which currently does nothing. You'll see when I click on it, it's like what they call an anchor link or an ID link that goes to content within the page, but there's no JavaScript attached to this. It's just pure HTML at this point. So we're going to make this work using our toggle web interaction component that we built in the previous lesson. So let's take a look at that. Inside of Visual Studio Code, it's going to be the same setup that we've used in all of our solutions. It's a parcel solution, has some config files in here. You'll notice in the source folder, we have our index.html file. This particular starter solution actually has two HTML files. You don't need to worry about support just yet. We're going to come back to that in a later lesson. But for now, let's take a look at this index.html. This has all the HTML in it that we need. It's loading that app.sas file, which of course is inside of the SAS folder here. And you'll see we've broken this out into multiple SAS files. We have a file for accordions, our configuration, the menu style for that menu that pops out, our products and our tabs. So you can feel free to take a look at all these, but they're basically just kind of some starter styles. And app.sas, as you can see, the only thing it does is load in the menu and the tabs and the products and the accordions. That's all that's doing. So that being said, if you scroll down in the index.html file here, you'll see we have our nav bar, and we've already configured a data-toggle. And that's why we have a functional toggle button for this nav button or this menu button at the top left here that pops out this menu. It's all running off of this data-toggle, which just like in the previous lessons is just a generic toggle. So we have this div container with a class of toggle. This is using the data-toggle attribute, and it has aria expanded. And then we have our menu itself, which is being toggled on and off. So that's exactly the same thing that we did in the previous lesson. In fact, if you take a look at the JavaScript file that we have loaded, it is using the exact same toggle script that we created in the previous lesson. It's the same thing. You can copy and paste it or just get it from the starter solution, whatever you want to do there. But you'll see we've gone ahead and instantiated a new instance of toggle using all of the default configuration options. And of course, we have the toggle script itself, which is totally unchanged from the end of the last lesson. So you have your attribute option, toggle container, and toggle class, and of course the on toggle event that is being fired. All of that stuff is the exact same as it was before. And before we dive in and start making some changes here, let's just take a quick look at the HTML structure of the tabs themselves. So you can see here, they're within a container div with a class of tabs. And then we have two main areas that you can think of. You have the tabs navigation, and then you have a collection of tab panels. So you can see over here in the application, this top part here where we have those three buttons at the top, if you will, these are the tabs. You can consider this whole row the tabs navigation. And then there are, corresponding to the three buttons up here, there are three tab panels down below. And each one of those tab panels has three products in it. So you'll see there's 3 hot dogs, 3 hamburgers, and then 3 healthy options. And so each of the tab panels, so you can see class equals tab panel, has 3 of those products inside of it. And you really don't need to worry about the contents of the tab. That's just kind of there as filler. These buttons don't do anything. This content is just meant to give us something to work with. So don't even worry about the whole product thing. Really, that's all you have to think about is, hey, we have a tabs nav with 3 tabs in it, and we have 3 tab panels down below. That's all that's really going on in this HTML file. And then all the way at the bottom, as usual, we're loading in the app.js file, which we already looked at. So all of that is very similar to what you've done before. And now that we've done a quick review of that, we are ready to jump in and make some tabs. This is going to be fun. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is, I'm not going to make any changes to toggle just yet, but what I want to do is I want to create a new instance of our toggle class so that we have an instance we can play around with the options and the config, and we're going to make this specific for our tab component that we want to make work within our application. So let's create a comment here that says tabs, const tabs equals new toggle, and we'll give that some options. We'll set an attribute. Maybe we'll just use data dash, not tub, not data tub, but data tab rather. And then toggle container, by default, that's toggle.toggle. But if you remember from our HTML file, the tabs are surrounded in a container called tabs. So we'll just change that toggle container to .tabs, like so. And now that we've added this new instance of our toggle class to our app.js file, it is now going to be listening on document click for any data tab attribute targets. So that means inside of our index.html file, we can go to each one of our tab triggers, our trigger buttons, if you will. And this is a little bit different. The way the HTML is set up here, it's actually an anchor. So it's an A tag with an href that references the ID of a tab panel. And for whatever reason, this is just kind of the standard way of doing tabs in web applications. I guess it's because of accessibility and like semantics. So for example, if for some reason somebody didn't have JavaScript loaded or JavaScript wasn't being executed because they're doing a scrape utility or something like that, I don't know. For whatever reason, if JavaScript's not working, this will still function, right? When I click on the hot dogs thing, it scrolls me to the div with an ID of dogs, right? Which is right down here. And that's the default behavior of what you could call an anchor link. It's just an anchor link within the current page or a bookmark within the current page that'll scroll the user to that area. And traditionally, this is the way you're going to see tabs structured in front-end frameworks like Bootstrap or Bulma or any sort of other front-end framework. They generally use this same structure. Just as an example, we can look at that. Bulma, we're going to look at this in a later lesson. This is really, really cool. If you've never used it, it's pretty awesome. But they have a bunch of components that you can drop in if you're using this. And tabs is one of them. And you'll notice the HTML structure is extremely similar. So see that right there. You have a div with a class of tabs, an unordered list, and then you have this like anchors that point to each tab. And that's just kind of the, for whatever reason, like I said, that's just kind of the standard in the industry for tabs. You don't actually use buttons. This is going to be a little bit different in this case. And really, there's not a big difference between using a button and an anchor tag whenever you are building an interactive web application. It just kind of makes that e.prevent default thing that we do a little more important, because you'll notice in the address bar at the top when we click, it actually navigates to that, and I have to like go back, so it creates navigation history by default. We want to make sure that we are preventing the default action from occurring, because we don't want to create history whenever we do this. And we don't want the browser to change our scroll position just by clicking on tabs. So, but anyway, I digress. I'm probably getting into the weeds too much. So let's back up. Let's talk about what we're doing here. We want to take each of these anchor links, which currently do nothing, and we want to attach our data-tab attribute to it so that we can use them as trigger buttons for our toggle functionality. So that's the same thing we've done before. We're just going to add data-tab equals. And then inside of this, what we can do is we'll just copy each of those IDs, and we'll just use that as the target selector for the toggle target of each of these trigger buttons. So whenever you click on the first tab, the hot dogs tab, it's going to go and it's going to trigger the dogs, or number sign dogs, which is this tab panel down here, and it's going to toggle the active class on and off of that tab panel. We also want to make sure we add aria expanded equals false on here. And then that way, just by adding those and saving, you'll notice if we look at a tab panel, so here's our hot dogs tab panel. When I click on the hot dog up here, you'll see it adds active. When I click on it again, it removes active. So we've added that toggle functionality to the data-tab attribute. And now we just need to update our CSS a bit to make sure that we can actually control the display of those elements based on that active class that it's being toggled on and off. So let's go find this tab panel class. That's going to be in tabs.sass. And in this file, we will simply add a new style down here for tab panels. Tab panel not active. Whoops. Display none. Like so. So we're saying when the tab panel is not active, let's go ahead and hide it. And of course, you'll see over on the left it refreshed. But now I can actually click on each tab and toggle them individually. And to give us a little bit of a better indicator, usually with tabs, what you would do is you would also sort of highlight the tab itself. So we can use, just like we did in previous lessons, use the aria expanded attribute to change the background color of this. So also in this file, let's just scroll up here. You see we're setting the background color of each tab to the lighter color. So maybe we'll just say when we have aria expanded equals true, then background color will be primary. And that way you'll see you get a nice little toggle indicator on each tab. Now, obviously this is not the way we want tabs to work, right? Because the way we have it set up, just by using a simple toggle that we've already built, it works, right? Like you could say like, oh, I click on the hamburger and that content shows up. But I have to individually toggle on and off all three tab panels. And that's not how users are going to expect tabs to work. What you would expect to happen is, first of all, when the page first loads, right now nothing shows up. You would kind of expect the first tab to be active, which actually we can fix that now. Because that's just HTML, right? So we can say for the hot dogs, the default state of aria expanded will be true, and it will already have an active class on that first tab panel. So that way when we refresh, the first tab is already open, which is probably something we want to make sure we do. But also what we want to do is when we click on hamburger, we would expect for the hot dog toggle to automatically be deselected or collapsed. and then it would show only the hamburger tab panel content below that. That's sort of the functionality users would expect from tabs, is you only see one tab at a time. You're not individually toggling each tab on and off based on what you want to see. So that means that our toggle script currently can't do that. So we can add a new option to it to basically force it to only allow a single sibling to be visible at any given time. And this sort of demonstrates a pretty cool thing that you can start to add to your toggle components or to your web interaction components as you're getting a little more advanced with this, is you can start to add lots of little options to take a single component but make it applicable to a lot of different scenarios. And I know I've said that a lot throughout the course, and it's kind of a theme that we're following throughout this, but as you're going to see here, we're going to kind of demonstrate how this toggle can not only be used for a simple like menu toggle like this, and that's sort of what we've been doing in previous lessons, but also for more advanced scenarios like these tabs here. So the first step is let's implement this idea of a single sibling. We're going to add an option to our toggle class. So let's go into toggle here and we'll add a new option called single, which will default to false. So if you set this to true, then we'll have some sort of functionality that's going to take a tab whenever it's activated and go ahead and deactivate any of its other siblings that are active. And of course, we need to do something with this option, not just have a Boolean that we can turn on and off. So let's scroll down to our toggle method here, where we're actually handling the toggle. And what we can do is we already have this Boolean here that we're setting that's saying, is it toggled, right? So is the tab panel that we just toggled on or off, is it currently active? And if that's the case, then whenever this is activated and we've set this single option to true, then basically we can say, okay, you just activated a toggle target. So let's go to all the other siblings and let's deactivate any of active siblings. So that'd be a very simple way to handle this. So we can create a new thing right after here that says collapse siblings if possible. And we can say if is toggled. So if that's truthy, or meaning we just activated a toggle target, and this.config.single. So if you've specified that the single option is true, then let's say document.querySelectorAll, and we'll basically select all of the active toggle buttons. And we know that we can get those because we're toggling the ARIA expanded attribute on and off. Right, that's this line right down here. So what we can do is we can actually build a special selector here that's going to say, go and get me all of the data-tab buttons, the toggle buttons, if you will. So that'll be this.config.attr. So that's going to get all of those, first of all. But that's going to get all the buttons. That's the same thing as up here we're using like get the closest button or whatever. But in this case, I'm going to the document and I'm getting all of the data-tab or data toggle or whatever buttons that we've configured. But I want to further filter that to ARIA expanded equals true. So I'm only going to get the buttons that are currently active. Right? And that's kind of what we want in this case, because what we want to say is when you click on hamburger, go and get the hot dog button, which is currently active, and deactivate it. And that's pretty easy to do because this is going to return a node list, which is kind of like an array. So we can iterate through each of those nodes, those HTML elements that it gets. And we could say for each active button.click. So we're kind of invoking a click, programmatically invoking a click on the active button, which is currently active. And of course, when you click on a toggle that is active, it's going to deactivate it. So just by adding this little bit of line here, you'll notice now when we click on hamburger, nope, that did not work. Oh, and that's because I didn't set the single option. I didn't actually use the single option. So let's fix that. In our tabs instance of our toggle class, we need to make sure we set, of course, single to true. What am I thinking? Now that we've done that, you'll notice as you select new tabs, it's going to go and deactivate the other tabs. Pretty cool, right? So all we did was just set a new single option, and then we're basically saying, hey, if you specified single, go and get all the active buttons, or the ones with ARIA expanded equals true, and then programmatically invoke a click on those buttons. And that's sort of similar to what we did with a key down listener. We programmatically invoked clicks in a previous lesson. We were messing around with a key down. So very, very similar in this case. We're just taking an HTML element and we're invoking a click event. Just as the user would click on a button, you can kind of programmatically invoke that same event. Cool. So this might feel like a win, but when you get to testing this and you get to implement it, you may think, okay, cool. We have these tabs. They're everywhere. They're looking really good. I love tabs. I'm going to put them all over my application, right? So you may start to think that that's something you want to do. And so just as an example, let's go down to the bottom of this after these tabs here, which is way down at the bottom, right before the /main tag there. We're going to add some new tabs. We'll call this, it's got to be about food, right? Breakfast tabs. So we'll do div class equals tabs like that. So we're going to use basically the same HTML structure we had up above. We're going to have tabs navigation, and you can copy and paste the above too. I don't know why I'm doing this by hand. That seems crazy. But we'll have a unordered list with a class of tabs nav, and then we'll have a list item, and then we'll do just like we did up above. Well, let's go ahead and copy. I'm going to copy and paste. This is crazy. There we go. So we'll just do like 2 tabs in this one. I'm just adding a second set of tabs to kind of demonstrate an issue you might run into. So what we'll do on the second set of tabs is we'll do, these are breakfast tabs, so we'll do bacon and eggs. Bacon and eggs, and then of course we need a bacon emoji, which of course they have a bacon emoji. That's awesome. No, I actually want the frying eggs. That looked good. There we go. So bacon and eggs inside of these tabs. And of course we need tab panels to connect those two. And what we'll do down here is we'll add the 2 tab panels to correspond to the 2 tabs we just created. So that's going to be bacon and div with an ID of bacon and a class of tab panel active, like so. And then we'll put a paragraph in here that just says bacon. And then we'll duplicate this for the eggs. Make sure that that ID matches this selector up here. Eggs here. And you'll see now that I save that, over here on the left, we have our new tabs that appear there. And the spacing there is kind of driving me crazy. So let's add tabs, margin, bottom, 30 pixels. That looks pretty good. There we go. So we've added a whole second set of tabs in our HTML here. Oh, and you know what? We have both our bacon and our egg showing up here. That's because we have the active class on both of those. We don't want that. There we go. So now that we've added the additional component, additional instance of this tabs component, what do you think is going to happen when we click on a tab? And because of that single option, it's going to go and try to find its sibling tabs and deactivate them. Well, you'll notice if I scroll down here and we click on the eggs, not only did it deactivate bacon here, but it actually deactivated the other component tabs as well. And this demonstrates a really important thing. When building components, you always need to make sure you're considering the experience of having multiple components on the page. Never ever hard code IDs and numbers and automatically generate IDs that only apply to a single component. It's something that I've done when I first started doing this. It's something that I see a lot of people doing when they're doing sort of components and things and building their own interactions, is that you don't really consider this multiple component on a page scenario until a bug arises in production. And that's certainly not what we want. So what we can do in this case in order to fix this is we can basically change the way our single query selector is working, because in our toggle script, what it's doing currently is it's going to the document and it's selecting all of the active data tab buttons, which is going to include all of the components on the page. So basically what we want to do is we want to scope this to just a more specific set of content. Very, very similarly to how we handled the toggle container, how we used that option before to get the toggle target, right? We were scoping that traversal to the target to the toggle target to a more specific set of content using the toggle container. And we can do the same thing in this case with our collapsing siblings. Is we can kind of make it configurable so that you could make it so that it goes out and collapses all of other active targets in the whole document. Or you can optionally specify to make it more specific and not affect other elements in the page. And honestly, this is one of those things where there's no right and wrong way to do it. It just kind of depends on what you want to do in your application. You could totally reuse toggle container and make that the scope. You could use document and just say you don't have the option to do that. Or you can create a whole new option, which is I think what we'll do in this case, so that it's the most configurable it can be. And so we'll create a whole new option that'll allow you to specify a whole separate selector for how you sort of traverse in searching for other sibling active toggle buttons, if you will. So let's do that. Let's go up to our options here, and right after single, we'll add single container. And let's set that to undefined by default. So I want to basically say, like, by default, keep doing what you're doing. And in which case it'll be this weird functionality where we're like searching the whole page. Because maybe there's some instances where you actually want that to occur. And just as an example, when we get into drop downs a little bit later, a lot of times, like when you use a drop down in the interface, like if I open this drop down and then I come and open this one, it's going to close the other active drop downs, right? Like you generally can't have more than one drop down open at a given time, even in just like a normal operating system or application interface. That's just kind of expected behavior. So sometimes you may want to search the whole document and collapse active things, but sometimes, like in the case of tabs, you may want to get a little bit more specific. And I want to cater to both of those scenarios. So what we'll do in this case is we'll have this single container, which by default will be undefined. And when it's undefined, we'll search the whole document. But if you set something more specific to this option, then we'll just traverse from the button to the closest single container, and we'll search the single container for active toggle buttons, if you will. Let's go down here now that we've added the single container. We will go implement this into our collapse siblings if possible area that we've created down here. So what we'll do is, first of all, let's get single container. So let single container equals document. So again, we're going to do the same thing we did before, is we're going to use the document by default. So this is currently going to do the same thing that it previously did. We're going to set single container to, whoops, and I didn't spell that right, container to, and we're going to reference the document itself. But if you've set this .config.single container, then instead of using document, we will set single container to button.closest, this.config.single container. So that's kind of the same thing we did when we were getting the toggle target up here. We're getting button.closest, this.config.toggle container. We're doing the same thing down here. You know, we're just traversing from the button. It's going to start at the button itself, and it's going to go upwards until it finds something that matches that single container selector. And if it finds, when it finds that single container, we will collapse siblings within the single container. Right, so we're going to scope that to within the single container. Then it's going to do query selector all. It's going to find the ARIA expanded true buttons, so the buttons that are active but only within that single container. And then it's going to do the same thing it did before, where it's going to take the active buttons and invoke a click in order to collapse those. And now that we've done that, we can make our tabs single container more specific than the document by changing its options in the instance of toggle here. So single container will equal .tabs, of course. And then if we save that, now when we come back, we click on the burger, it's going to still be broken apparently. Did I not do something right? I misspelled it again. Oh my goodness. My big old dumb fingers totally messed that up. I'm switching the I's and the A's today for some reason. I don't know why, guys. I apologize. So let's fix that. Now we have single container set to .tabs. Let's test this. There we go. So now we're good. So you'll notice when I come down here and I click, it is deselecting the active buttons, but it is only deselecting them within the single container, which is, in this case, the tabs container, right? So in the case of the first component, you'll see as a highlight here when I hover over this, it's only going to search that highlighted box for active buttons whenever you click on this. And that's going to allow that functionality to be a little more applicable, especially when we have multiple components on the same page. Very cool. And if you think you are done with your tabs, you're not just yet. There's actually one other issue you may have already noticed if you're testing yourself. I've kind of deftly avoided this issue thus far. But you will notice when I click on the hot dog, of course, this is a toggle, right? So what's going to happen when you click on the hot dog? Well, it's going to toggle it off. And that's kind of weird, right? So again, this is sort of something that you wouldn't expect from tabs. Like I wouldn't expect to be able to turn off an active tab whenever you have a tabs component. And that's an additional option that we can potentially add to our solution in order to improve it and make it a little bit more flexible in a wide range of component scenarios. So let's go ahead and add some sort of option. We can maybe call this expand only. So maybe we want to set the option where you're only allowed to activate or expand targets. You're never allowed to collapse them, right? So this is actually going to get a little bit weird because when you start to add these options to your web interactions, you have to start thinking about how they interact with each other. So I'll kind of demonstrate the weirdness. You guys can kind of judge for yourself if that's weird. But what we can do is you may think initially, well, okay, let's add a new option, right? So obviously we want this to be an option. We can call it expand only. Set that to false by default. But in our instance of tabs, if we set expand only to true, and then inside of the toggle script here, if we actually utilize that to basically say, well, if you try to collapse a target, we just won't let you, that's going to be an issue, right? So I'll show you. You may have already worked it out in your head yourself. And what we'll do is before we toggle the class, we'll say expand only. So first of all, if this.config.expand only. So if you've set that option and the target currently contains this class, and so target.classlist.contains, that's sort of the same thing we did down here for is toggled. So if it currently contains this.config.toggle class, that means that we're about to take it off, right? So if the target contains that, then we're about to deactivate it. We're about to remove the active class. So instead of doing that, instead of allowing the script to continue to toggle the target, let's just simply return, right? So if you set expand only and the target contains that class, then don't do anything because we want to only allow for expands. But what's going to happen because we have the single option also enabled here is because we're kind of using a combination of both of those options, we're going to get some weird functionality here by implementing this. And you may have already guessed this, you may have already worked it out yourself, exactly what's going to happen, but you'll see now we've essentially disabled all collapses, right? So if I click on the burger, it's not collapsing that. If I click on the broccoli, it's not collapsing that. And furthermore, if I click on any of these, I can't turn them off, right? Because we disabled all collapses. So even the single collapse, which is trying to go to its siblings and collapse, even that has now been disabled because we have completely disabled the ability to sort of collapse or remove the toggle class from a target. And that's not certainly what we want. And this is why I say it gets a little weird, because we kind of need to do some weird checking of what's going on here. And I'll show you basically what's occurring and the reason why this is happening. If we just do console.log and log out the event, the mouse event that's being passed here, you'll notice in the console over here, if we refresh and we click on this, you'll notice every time I click on a tab, you're actually getting two mouse events. You're getting the first one, which is my click, the user's click that's clicking on it. And then the second event is actually being called on from right here, active button.click. So that second event was actually going back to the active hot dog button because we have that single option enabled currently, it's going to the hot dog button and it's attempting to deactivate it. But it's because we have enabled expand only, it's actually blocking both of those events from passing through here. But what we actually want to occur is let me just refresh here. We want it so that if I were to click on the hot dog button, that's a user invoked click, I want to disallow that, right? Because we don't want to be able to collapse this hot dog button. But we do want it so that whenever I click on the hamburger, for the single script invoked click to actually be able to collapse the hot dog button. And if that sounds a little bit confusing, it's because it's kind of weird the way you got to work that out in your head. But that's the idea, is that we want to continue to allow our script invoke clicks while still blocking the user clicks, which cause collapses. And in order to do that, there's a couple different ways to do it. You could try to look at these events and figure out which one actually is the script invoked one. And the cool thing is there's this thing, you'll notice this first property on here is trusted as true, is trusted false. That's actually a new specification that will allow you to tell the difference between a script invoked or a dispatched event and a user invoked event. So when it's a trusted event, that's like a click from a user. The user actually clicked, and you can call that a trusted event. When you have an untrusted event, that's a dispatched event or a script invoke event that occurs from our script. So when we say .click, like we're telling it to pretend like it's a click, that is an untrusted event. But unfortunately, even though that is available in Chrome, that doesn't work in Safari and also in Internet Explorer. So the browser support is pretty iffy on that. I think it's still in a living spec, so it's not even an official feature yet. So we probably shouldn't use that, even though that would be a little bit easier than what I'm about to do. But you could, potentially try to say if the positioning is 0 or something, then that's a script invoke click, because they don't have obviously positioning, like client X and client Y is always going to be 0. But then I would worry about not being able to click on a button at the very top left corner of the screen. And that would be a really specific scenario where your script wouldn't work. But still, I want this to be perfect, right? I'm a perfectionist, so we must make this work in all scenarios. So what we're going to do instead is we're simply going to, here whenever we are invoking our active button click, right here, let's put some curly brackets around that to turn it into a bona fide arrow function. And then before we do a dispatched event or a script invoked click, what we're going to do is we're going to set a property on this class that I'm going to make up. I'm just going to say this.collapsing siblings, or I should probably say collapsing single siblings equals true. So we're going to set that to true right before we do the active button.click, and then we're going to set it back to false right afterwards. So while we're doing the active button click, this property that's going to be set on the class, collapsing single siblings, is going to be true. Whenever the user clicks on a button, that will be a falsy value, because it's either going to be undefined or it's going to be back to false if this is already run once. And that means that we can use this value in our expand only thing to basically say, if you've enabled expand only and the target class contains that, which means we're about to deactivate it, and collapsing siblings is falsy, meaning this is probably a user click, then let's return. But while this click is running, this is going to be true, which will allow those dispatched events or those script invoked clicks to continue past this line. And then they're going to go ahead and deactivate their target and do all the rest of the stuff that they need to do, right? So that's going to be good. So we will allow that to pass through. We'll go back over here, we'll refresh. Let's see if that worked. And you'll see, sure enough, that works. I can click and it does deselect. If I click on the broccoli, it will not let me collapse that. So feels a little hacky. I don't love this solution and having to set this sort of, not quite a global variable, but like this class specific variable that does it. The way I've actually done this before, like if you use that e.trusted, you could take all this junk out and just do e.isTrusted. But again, because the browser support's so iffy on that, And you would actually do it like that. You would want to see if that's truthy, because trusted events are user events. This will actually work. Like if I took all this out, that's much cleaner, right? And that's in the future when that gains a little traction, gains a little browser support. I don't even know of a polyfill right now, so I don't even think you could use that. But you'll see here, that works too. That works just fine. I still can't collapse this, and that's so much nicer in my opinion. You could even do something like e.pagex. So if that's falsy and e.pagey is falsy, so if those are both zeros, then that will work. Well, no, it won't work actually. So actually it wasn't page X. It might have been client X and client Y. I forget the exact tool. No, that I have the wrong variables there. Hold on just a second. Debugging. So let's click here. Client, oh, that should work. Client X and client Y. Oh, no, truthy. I want them to be truthy. That's why it's not working. So I got my Boolean, my true false stuff is all flipped around in my head for some reason. So you see this will work. But again, the only way that wouldn't work is in the case that you had a user click at 0, 0 in the page, which I know is really specific and really unlikely that will actually occur. I don't know that I've ever clicked at exactly 0, 0, probably accidentally when I was trying to resize the page or the window or something, but I don't know. But even though that looks a little bit cleaner, maybe, I still kind of prefer the approach that is a little more bulletproof, but maybe it looks a little ugly. So we'll go back to this whole collapsing single siblings thing. You can use whichever of those methods you prefer, but this will work in this case, and it's pretty bulletproof. Like again, it will, in that very specific scenario, this would actually allow a 0, 0 click at the very top left corner of the page there, but you can see that is going to work just fine on both our first tabs component as well as our second one. I can no longer collapse the active tab. Okay, and one last really minor thing that I think is important. Always good to think about performance. We're basically checking this target class list contains twice. So we don't want to do that, right? So what we can do is we can actually take this is toggled and move it up here. If you guys were watching me do this, you're probably like, why is he doing that twice? But have no fear. I was always planning on coming back to it. I just didn't want to confuse people by moving stuff around too often. But you'll see this is toggled. Target class list contains, but because we moved it up above where we toggle the target, we actually have to flip this around, right? Because we're about to toggle that class. So at this point in the script, it will actually be the opposite of whether or not it contains. And now this will be the same value there. So we'll go ahead and instead of checking that again here, we will say if this is not toggled. So again, if you are collapsing this or deactivating this, then we're going to say, wait a second, we have expand only. Let's just return out of this method and you won't get that far. So just a very minor performance improvement. It's always good anytime you find yourself doing something more than once to make sure you can avoid doing that. And you'll see it just does the exact same thing here. We've just kind of reduced the amount of calls to class list.contains, which will theoretically be a little tiny bit faster, although it's probably pretty insignificant, but it's always good to be thinking about performance. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for our tabs. We've created some pretty cool tab functionality. It took some work. It took some extra options and some additions to our toggle component that we built. But really, in the end, if you look at this and you look at kind of the changelog here, we basically added two things, right? We added 3 new options, 2 of which are kind of the same thing. They have to do with a single thing. So really 2 new options to our toggle class and just a few lines of code. We added this expand only thing and we added this collapse siblings if possible thing. That's it. That's all we added, but we now have the ability to not only have a simple toggle like you see here, but also this what is seemingly a lot more complex, but it's still the same component. It's just a toggle with a very different configuration, and we suddenly have the ability to have tabs within our application, which I think is a pretty cool solution. And I think that feels like a win. It feels like we have not as much code to manage. We didn't have to go write a whole tabs component thing. We still only have 2 files in our application, which is pretty crazy because it's doing a lot of different stuff at this point. So hopefully you enjoyed that and you found some use and some benefit out of going through this exercise. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at a very different type of common component that you'll probably want to use in some of your applications that you may be building.